Twice Freed by Juliana Ballou. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus hath made me free from the law of sin and death. Romans 8:2. I grew up having an ordinary life. My father was a rabbi, and my mother would stay at home and take care of me and my siblings. I had 2 sisters and a baby brother who was just under 2 years old. We were a close family, and we enjoyed spending time together. Although I loved my sisters, I loved my baby brother more, and would spend as much time as I could with him after my daily studies at the synagogue. I would play games with him, take him on walks, and even let him play with some of my toys. Even though I was several years older than he was, we had a special bond, and I didn't think anything could change that. Having a brother was the greatest thing on earth to me. Although I experienced good things, many solemn moments filled my life as well. It was the time of year known as Passover. I dreaded this time of year ever since I could remember, and every year I asked my father the same question. Father would choose the best-looking lamb. It had to be spotless, without any blemish. He would take that innocent little lamb, place it on the altar, and cut its throat with a sharp knife, and there it would be offered as a sacrifice. Fighting back the tears that threatened to fall, I watched the young, bleeding lamb cry out in pain. "Why must you kill the lamb?" I asked Father. "Because, my son, the law requires an atonement for our sin," he solemnly explained. "But the lamb never did anything." I studied the lines on Father's face. "Why must it die?" "The price of our sin is far too great for us to pay on our own. It requires the blood of a spotless lamb to wash it away." His eyes now rested on the bleeding animal. Father tried to explain it to me every Passover, but I just couldn't understand it. Atonement? What did that even mean? If we had done something wrong, why couldn't we just pay the price for it? Why did something innocent have to die? Overall, I had a pretty good life. It remained quiet and uneventful, but I didn't mind. I spent my time with my friends and family and did well in my studies. But one day, everything changed, and I knew it would never be the same. Herod sent out a horrible decree. All baby boys aged 2 and under were to be killed. I'll never forget that dreadful day when the Roman soldiers broke down the door and took my beloved baby brother and killed him right in front of our eyes. I watched in utter horror amidst the heart-wrenching screams of my mother. It was like a sword had pierced my own heart, and I stood there reeling from the pain. I stared with fear and contempt at the soldier who had just stabbed my baby brother. His face bore an ugly scar, and his eyes showed no sign of guilt for what he had done. It seemed like I was so helpless in preventing anything as I was forced to watch this tragedy in great agony. I wanted to do something. I just didn't know what. As I stood there with my jaw clenched tightly on that day of my brother's death, I vowed that somehow, some way, I would get revenge. Years went by since that awful day, but it never faded from view. The pain never subsided, nor did it ever leave. It was always there, deep down, leaving me feeling empty inside, and the more I thought about it, the greater my desire for revenge became. My parents missed him too, I knew, and on some days it seemed like the pain of losing a son was more than they could bear. I never forgot my vow, however, and once I became of age, I left home to complete my mission. Our Roman government had been persecuting people for years, and much innocent blood had been shed. It was high time someone decided to do something about it, and I purposed in my heart that I would be that man. I knew it was wrong, but I was going to make the world a better place, a happier one. At least, that's what I thought. It started out small. My friends and I formed a gang, and we stole from the tax collectors and started riots in the street. I wasn't the only person unhappy with the Roman government of our day, and many in agreement would join our protest. We got away with a lot, and we were able to outrun the soldiers and escape. For years, this was my life. I spent most of my time in misery, waiting for fulfillment and purpose that never came. Meanwhile, I had heard about a certain man here in Jerusalem who had been performing miracles. They said he was a great teacher, and multitudes came out to hear him speak. People said he healed the sick, made the blind to see, made the lame to walk again, and even raised people from the dead. I was skeptical at first, but I couldn't ignore my growing curiosity. I decided I must see for myself. I went to hear this man speak, and I was amazed to see the thousands of people gathered around him. He was an ordinary-looking man, but his face was gentle and kind, and full of compassion. As I listened, I did not understand the things he spoke of. He said he had come not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. I listened to this with disbelief. I had always thought that the law was meant to keep people in bondage. How could it be fulfilled by one man? I turned and asked the man standing next to me who he was. Jesus, the man replied. Jesus of Nazareth. Many of my friends had already been arrested, and I knew my turn was coming. Most of the soldiers knew who I was by now, and I was sure they were watching for me. One day the tax collectors came into town to collect money. One man, when asked to pay his taxes, refused. He argued that he had many children and couldn't afford to pay that much money. I knew that tax collectors often overcharge people for their own benefit, so I was glad this man was taking a stand. The tax collectors became more stern with him and insisted he pay. The man stood his ground. As a result, a soldier drew his sword and brutally cut off his hand. This enraged me, and my friends and I started protesting in the street. I was passionate about our cause and believed it to be rather noble. It got out of hand, and the soldiers came to stop us, but I was determined not to be silenced. I wanted my voice to be heard. I wanted to make a difference. Then, amid the chaos and people around me, one soldier stuck out to me. Something about him looked familiar. The ugly scar on his face, the smug and unashamed look in his eyes. Then it all came back to me. The screams, the horror, the blood. This was the man who had killed my brother. This was the chance for revenge I had been waiting for. Now was my time. I waited for the right moment and caught him unaware. I beat him mercilessly. I stopped only when I was sure he was dead. Then I fled the scene of my crime. But eventually, the soldiers caught up with me, and I was arrested and thrown in prison. It seemed hopeless as I sat in my jail cell counting the passing days. I lived my life as a common thief, and I was even responsible for someone's death. Now came the day that I would pay the cost of my reckless life. I trembled at the thought of my fate. I was to be crucified, a horrible death used for punishing common criminals. I never thought of myself as a criminal until now. I had always justified my actions, and I really didn't see myself as such a bad person. I often wondered what my brother would think of me if he were still alive. Maybe I wouldn't have ended up here had he hadn't been killed. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe I would have led a better life. But none of that mattered now. It was all over, and I could think of nothing else as I sat there waiting for what seemed forever for my worthless life to end. One day, Roman soldiers stormed into my cell, grabbed me, and ordered for me to follow them. This is it, I thought. My life was coming to an end. He led me to an angry mob of people, and it was so loud I couldn't hear myself think. "Crucify him!" they shouted again and again. What is going on? I asked myself, confused by the madness. I was thrown between two pillars before Pilate and next to another man on trial. "What has this man done?" questioned Pilate. "I see no fault in him." But their only response was their one refrain, "Crucify him!" Pilate seemed to be reluctant to sentence him for one reason or another. I studied this other man. His face was greatly marred, and he wore a crown of thorns that was so deeply ingrained into his skull that blood was streaming down. He was not pleasant to look at, but something about him seemed vaguely familiar. The Pharisees and religious leaders were making accusations against him, and the crowd's consent only grew. But yet he gave no response, and even Pilate marveled at his silence. Despite all accusations and the blood that masked his face, I had to wonder, who was this man? Torn between this decision, Pilate asked the crowd to choose one man to be released. This was the end. One of us was going to be put to death, and I was sure it was going to be me. I held my breath. But against all my expectations, something amazing happened. The crowd started shouting my name. They chose me. Stunned, I watched Pilate wash his hands. "I will not be responsible for this man's blood," he tried to erase his guilt. Immediately, one of the soldiers grabbed my arm and loosened my chains, and I watched in utter disbelief as they fell at my feet. I was free. I couldn't believe it. I jumped and ran while shouting out loud. I was free. I was really free. But I knew my freedom wasn't free. Someone had to pay the price. From my vantage point beyond the shadows, I watched the other man carry up his cross the steep hill. He stumbled and fell many times, and the weight of his heavy cross seemed crushing. He collapsed from exhaustion, and a soldier commanded one man in the crowd to carry his cross for him. I observed from a distance as the Roman soldiers placed the nails on his hands and feet. As he hung there on the cross, guilt struck me. That was supposed to be me on that cross. This man had done nothing. I was a condemned criminal. I was the one who deserved death. People mocked him, cursed him, and even spit on him, saying, "If you're really Jesus, the Son of God, come down from the cross." Wait, could it be? Was this man Jesus? As I looked up at him, his eyes met mine. He looked at me as if to say, "I'm doing this for you. Come and put your faith in me, and I will make you whole." He grew weaker with each breath on that dark, dreary day, and I stood there watching in the shadow of the cross. I needed to be alone for a little while, so I entered the temple in search of peace and solitude. My head ached from the noise of the angry crowd of people and activity of the day. As I rested, I tried putting the pieces together to see if I could find a reasonable explanation for my release. Images filled my mind of Jesus on the cross as blood ran down his broken and wounded body. All of a sudden, I was a little boy again. It was Atonement Day, and tears were streaming down my face as on the altar a lamb bled and died. I didn't understand why the lamb had to die. Father was telling me that the law required the blood of an innocent lamb, that we couldn't pay the price for our sin. Then it struck me. Just as that lamb had to be slain because the law required atonement, Jesus was killed because I had broken the law. No sooner had I come to this conclusion than when I heard a bolt of thunder crash violently. Following was an awful loud tearing noise. I spun around to see a scarlet red veil torn in two and lying on the floor, revealing the most sacred place for all to see, the holy place. A few days later, I was roaming through the streets of Jerusalem while pondering the events of the last few days when a woman's voice broke into my thoughts. "Have you heard? Jesus has risen," she proclaimed for the world to hear, not caring if they thought she was crazy. Risen? No, it couldn't be possible. I had seen him brutally crucified with my own eyes. He was dead. But this lady was adamant that he was alive and that she had actually seen him. I asked her to take me to the place where his body had been buried. She led me there and then left. I stood there in front of the tomb contemplating whether I should go in. The stone that had once been stationed in front of the tomb, sealing the bitter sting of death, was now rolled away, serving as an invitation to all who passed by to come and witness this wonderful miracle. I timidly walked in, not knowing what to expect. True to the lady's word, his body was gone. As I stood there, a man dressed in a shining white garment approached me. "Why are you here?" he inquired, as if my search was pointless. "They say he has risen. Is it true? Has he?" "If you're searching for the Messiah, then you look in the wrong place, my friend, for he has defeated death itself. He lives indeed." As the man left, I considered his words. Jesus' death brought me life. Could his resurrection bring me hope? For as long as I could remember, my life had been controlled by anger and bitterness. The things I had done were worthy of death. Yes, it was me who should have been crucified. Jesus took my place on the cross that day as the soldiers let me go free. I was the guilty, he was the innocent. Desperate for relief from my pain, I left the empty tomb far behind as I raced to the hill Golgotha. Beyond the setting sun, I could see 2 pieces of wood that resembled a cross. I fell beneath its shadow and cried out to the one who died for me. "I've spent my life in misery and pain. I want to change. Tell me, is there hope here for me?" I rose to my feet upon seeing a man slowly walking toward me. As he drew near, he called out my name. When I heard his familiar voice, I ran to meet him. "Jesus," I asked, "is it you?" As my eyes searched him for an answer, the light reflected that his face was no longer marred and stained with blood. He smiled as he showed me the holes in his hands where the nails were put through. We embraced under the sun's final ray of light. "Now I understand," I stated firmly. "I finally understand why that lamb had to be sacrificed," I continued with tears in my eyes. "There was a law and I broke it. Justice required blood I couldn't shed. You willingly became the payment for sin, and your death has made me free." As I looked into his eyes, I saw they were overflowing with love and forgiveness, and the most remarkable feeling encompassed me. The chains of sin and death I had been carrying for so long vanished. I was free from the bondage of sin. Turning back, I looked at the cross with eyes full of gratitude. It was stained with the very blood that had brought my freedom. Because his heart was broken, mine was mended. By his suffering, I was made whole. My dirty hands were now cleansed by the spikes that were put through his. By his sorrow, I have found peace and life by his death. Through Jesus' death and resurrection, I am twice freed. I am Barabbas, and this is my story. Thank you for listening to this Easter story. Jesus took my place on the cross that day. It was me who should have been hanging there. I am Barabbas. I am Barabbas.
I am Barabbas.
I am Barabbas.
I am Barabbas.
I am Barabbas.
I am Barabbas.